Hollywood has always sold the illusion that danger can be choreographed, that every spark, every explosion, every rising flame bends obediently to the will of directors and special effects teams. But behind the shimmering facade of blockbuster action lies a far more volatile truth. Fire is not a tool, it is a force, and for decades, it has slipped through the cracks of control, turning carefully engineered spectacles into real emergencies that crews were never prepared to face. Some of the industry's most celebrated action films came within moments of destruction, moments when a planned blast erupted beyond its boundaries, when an overlooked material ignited like tinder, or when a gust of wind transformed a modest flame into a wildfire, threatening to swallow entire sets. These incidents were not merely technical mishaps, they were disasters narrowly avoided, the kinds of events that left scorched equipment, panicked crews, and shaken performers in their wake. What the public saw were polished sequences, thrilling scenes in which fire behaved exactly as the script demanded. What they did not see were the nights when alarms rang through sound stages, when firefighters rushed past bewildered actors, and when producers quietly rewrote reports to bury the truth before journalists could ever ask the right questions. Tonight, we lift the curtain on 15 action films whose productions were nearly consumed by flames. Some of these fires were brief flashes of danger, others raged with terrifying intensity, destroying structures and forcing entire teams to flee. All of them reveal a side of Hollywood that few ever witness, a world where the line between cinematic illusion and uncontrolled disaster becomes dangerously thin. These are the untold stories of the movies that almost burned down their own sets, and once you see what happened behind the scenes, you'll never look at their fiery on-screen moments the same way again. Fact 1. The Dark Knight flames that outran the blueprint. The destruction of Gotham in The Dark Knight depended on meticulous planning, but one sequence proved that no level of preparation can fully tame fire. The miniature city built for the explosion was a masterpiece of craftsmanship. Hundreds of hand-constructed buildings, detailed streets, and structural reinforcements designed to collapse in perfect sync. Effects teams calculated the timing and power of every charge, expecting a controlled eruption that would ripple across the model with cinematic precision. But when the ignition detonated, the fire surged far beyond the anticipated burn radius. Accelerants hidden within adhesives and paints ignited with unexpected ferocity, sending flames spiraling upward instead of outward. Heat blasted across the stage, forcing operators to abandon their stations as smoke blanketed the viewing monitors. Several crew members later admitted they briefly feared the entire effects hangar might ignite. Emergency crews raced in, extinguishing hotspots as the miniature smoldered into a warped, blackened ruin. The incident was officially logged as a thermal escalation, a phrase carefully chosen to avoid implying negligence or danger. Yet eyewitness accounts described a moment of raw, uncontrolled force that reminded everyone present that practical effects always carry unpredictable risks. Nolan, reviewing the footage afterward, recognized that the camera had captured something extraordinary, something too visceral to recreate. The shot was ultimately used in the final film, its intensity celebrated worldwide, even as the real story behind it remained quietly locked away within studio walls. Fact 2. Die Hard. Fire in the heart of the tower. On the Die Hard set, the illusion of a high-rise under siege came startlingly close to reality when a planned explosion ignited hidden insulation within the soundstage ceiling. The interior of the Nakatomi Plaza set was packed with pyrotechnics, breakaway glass, and scorching squib charges meant to simulate heavy gunfire. During a take involving a corridor blast, the detonation produced a surge of heat that traveled upward into the rafters. Decades-old soundproofing materials, dry and brittle from age, caught fire almost instantly. Flames crawled across the ceiling, shedding sparks and debris as smoke poured downward into the set. Crew members shouted warnings, while Bruce Willis, still in character and mid-scene, felt the temperature spike around him. He was quickly pulled aside as firefighters on standby rushed in, dousing the flames before they reached nearby tanks of compressed air used for debris cannons. Production halted while the damage was assessed. Part of the ceiling had collapsed. Lighting rigs were compromised, and several crew members were treated for minor burns and smoke inhalation. Fox executives moved swiftly to suppress details, framing the event as a minor effects misfire. But insiders remembered a moment when the line between cinematic tension and genuine catastrophe nearly vanished. The final film showcases seamless, explosive action. Yet beneath that polish is the memory of a night when the Nakatomi Tower almost burned for real. Fact 3. Mission Impossible 2. A run-through real fire. John Woo's stylized vision for Mission Impossible 2 demanded balletic flames and operatic explosions, but one outdoor sequence escalated far beyond artistry. The production chose a rugged Australian hillside for a stunt in which Tom Cruise would sprint through rising fire lines. Effects crews laid accelerant gels in precise arcs, testing wind conditions repeatedly throughout the day. But nature proved less predictable than their charts. As the sun set, a shift in wind direction funneled oxygen toward the ignition zone. When the fire was lit, the flames erupted higher than projected. Leaping across rocks and igniting dry brush beyond the cleared safety perimeter, embers spiraled upward, drifting into the surrounding vegetation already parched by seasonal heat. Within seconds, multiple spot fires ignited, spreading far too quickly for the crew to contain. Stunt teams scrambled uphill, dragging hoses that sputtered under low pressure. Local firefighters were summoned as the blaze threatened to race across the hillside toward a nearby forest. Several crew members suffered heat exhaustion, and production entered an immediate shutdown. The official report softened the reality, labeling the incident an environmental flare event, but those present knew how close they had come to triggering a full-scale wildfire. The captured footage remained breathtaking, Tom Cruise framed against towering flames, but behind that mesmerizing image lay a present, near disaster the studio worked hard to bury. Fact 4. The Expendables 3. When the armory became a real blast zone, the production of The Expendables 3 embraced massive spectacle, transforming an aging Bulgarian warehouse into a makeshift armory filled with prop weapons, crates of blank ammunition, and rows of pyrotechnic rigs wired to simulate a chaotic battlefield. For days, effects teams rehearsed sequences designed to unfold like dominoes, explosions rolling from one corner of the building to the other, while stunt performers dove through smoke and debris. Yet during a routine test run, a single misfired squib broke that choreography entirely. The spark landed in an area where residue from earlier blasts had accumulated. A fine mixture of powdered dust and fragments of deteriorated blanks that behaved like tinder. The ignition triggered a violent chain reaction, sending a shockwave of flame vaulting across the warehouse. Crew members were thrown off balance as storage racks collapsed, scattering prop rifles across the floor. Heat surged upward, warping metal beams and blowing out overhead fixtures. Several stunt technicians suffered burns while scrambling for safety, and part of the warehouse roof gave way under the intensity of the fire. Emergency responders battled the blaze for nearly an hour before containing it. Lionsgate executives quickly imposed non-disclosure agreements on crew members, framing the incident as a controlled effect that exceeded expectations. Though insiders knew there had been nothing controlled about the blast, the production lost equipment, time, and resources. But what unsettled many was how narrowly the crew avoided catastrophic casualties. The final film showcases polished, rhythmic destruction, explosions erupting with textbook precision. But behind that cinematic spectacle lies the memory of a real detonation that momentarily transformed fiction into genuine danger. Fact 5. Backdraft, a film that played too close to the real thing. Ron Howard's Backdraft set out to capture the unpredictable ferocity of fire with unprecedented authenticity. Instead of relying on optical tricks or miniature models, the production built sprawling interior sets, corridors, stairwells, burning rooms designed to channel flames as though they were alive. Flame bars, oxygen vents, and accelerant pathways were arranged meticulously to create the illusion of a fire, breathing, expanding, and contracting with atmospheric shifts. But during the filming of a particularly intense rescue sequence, the carefully choreographed environment backfired. A sudden rush of oxygen entered the set when a door was opened at precisely the wrong moment, creating an unintended backdraft that roared through the corridor. The fire shot upward to the rafters, then curled downward in a rolling wave that devoured props and scorched equipment. Several crew members dropped to the floor to escape the heat, while firefighters stationed nearby sprinted in to contain the runaway blaze. Because the sprinkler system had been disabled to preserve visual continuity, suppression relied entirely on human intervention. The flames warped structural elements of the set, rendering portions unusable and forcing production delays. Universal Studios released only a vague statement about unexpected flame behavior, avoiding scrutiny of the near-fatal incident. For actors who had trained with real firefighters, the moment was a sobering reminder that their simulated inferno had crossed into reality. The resulting footage, though visually spectacular, carries an unspoken legacy. It was born from a real blaze that the crew barely survived. Fact 6. Terminator Salvation. When the future's war ignited the past's ruins, Terminator Salvation brought its apocalyptic vision to life by filming in the skeletons of abandoned industrial complexes scattered across New Mexico. These derelict buildings, coated in decades of grease, chemical dust, and deteriorated materials, offered a gritty authenticity that matched the film's bleak atmosphere. But during the setup for a massive battle sequence involving synchronized explosions and collapsing structures, the hidden hazards of the location revealed themselves. A detonator fired slightly earlier than planned, sending sparks skittering across the cracked concrete. Those sparks slipped into a pocket of residual industrial waste accumulated beneath a rusted walkway. The ignition was instantaneous. Flames erupted in unexpected patterns, racing along surfaces coated with invisible chemical films. The fire leapt to a pile of foam props and timber debris left from earlier takes, generating a thick column of black smoke that reduced visibility to nearly nothing. Crew members scrambled to relocate cameras and equipment. While stunt performers navigated blindly through smoldering terrain, firefighters struggled to approach the source because collapsing structures created hazards at every turn. Production was halted as investigators evaluated whether the site remained structurally safe. The official accounts described the event as an effects irregularity, a phrase that concealed the severity of the incident. Those who were there recalled how quickly the simulated battleground transformed into a genuine inferno, one that mirrored the world-ending destruction portrayed in the film. Fact 7. The Crow. Flames that marked the beginning of a curse. Before The Crow became forever associated with tragedy, the production survived a fire that many on set later described as an omen. The incident occurred during a nighttime shoot along a meticulously constructed street facade, meant to evoke a decaying industrial neighborhood. Special effects teams had placed flame pots along the rooftops to create a brooding, atmospheric glow for the cameras. Conditions were calm at first, but as the scene progressed, a sudden gust of wind carried sparks downward, landing on a heap of tar paper, old lumber, and insulation scraps that had accumulated behind the set walls. These materials, long-dried and highly flammable, ignited instantly. Crew members shouted warnings as flames climbed the back of the facades, illuminating the night with a harsh orange glare. The fire advanced quickly, far faster than anyone anticipated, sending smoke billowing into the alleys and warping the wooden supports that held the street set together. Firefighters stationed nearby rushed in, battling the blaze as production scrambled to relocate equipment. Though the flames were eventually contained, the damage was extensive. Sections of the set had to be rebuilt, schedules were rearranged, and the mood across the production shifted in ways that were difficult to articulate. Some crew members reported feeling an unnerving heaviness afterward, a sense that the fire had unsettled something intangible. When later tragedies struck, this early blaze became part of a whispered narrative, an uncanny moment when a fictional world steeped in darkness seemed to bleed into reality. Fact 8. Blade Runner, the night the future nearly burned. The dystopian landscape of Blade Runner owed much of its atmosphere to the elaborate practical setups that filled the set with steam, neon reflections, and flickering flames. But these same elements contributed to one of the production's most dangerous nights. During a late shoot inside a narrow alleyway built within an aging studio, technicians activated an array of flame bars designed to cast long, shifting shadows across the dripping walls. Unbeknownst to the crew, decades-old insulation deep within the rafters had become brittle and highly combustible. When one flame bar malfunctioned, sending a longer than usual tongue of fire upward, it brushed against the insulation, igniting it instantly. Burning fibers drifted down through the darkness, landing on props and puddles of chemical residue left behind by previous effects tests. Flames began to spread across the floor, forcing camera crews to retreat. Within moments, the fire had climbed the walls, illuminating the alleyway with a brightness that contradicted the film's moody aesthetic. Fire crews intervened, hacking through parts of the set to reach hidden pockets of flame still smoldering in the rafters. The incident forced production to halt while the studio assessed safety risks associated with continuing in the aging facility. Officially, the event was minimized as a minor ignition, but cast and crew remembered the panicked scramble to escape the heat and smoke. Many later said the moment felt eerily symbolic, a vision of a collapsing future nearly mirrored by the destruction of the set itself. Fact 9. Spider-Man, 2002. The backlot inferno that erased a city block. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man required a sprawling recreation of New York City's bustling streets. Built across Sony's famed New York Street backlot, the environment was designed to withstand stunts, explosions, and wirework, functioning as a durable playground for high-energy action. During preparations for a nighttime stunt sequence, effects teams conducted a preliminary test detonation meant to simulate a storefront explosion. A single spark from the blast drifted farther than expected, settling on a row of fabric awnings lining the facades. These awnings ignited instantly, flames racing along the storefronts as though pulled by invisible currents. Crew members rushed to contain the blaze, but a strong gust of wind transformed the contained fire into a roaring corridor of heat. Flames leapt from building to building, feeding on decades-old timber and set materials that had accumulated from countless productions. Firefighters spent hours battling the inferno, but by dawn, New York Street had been reduced to charred rubble. The destruction caused millions in losses and triggered a complete reconstruction of the iconic backlot. Studio representatives described the event as an unfortunate accident, yet internal accounts revealed a mixture of outdated infrastructure and escalating demands for spectacle that had pushed safety margins to their limits. For those who witnessed it firsthand, the memory remained vivid, a dramatic reminder that Hollywood's illusions are built on fragile foundations, and sometimes those foundations burn. Fact 10. The Matrix Reloaded. When the freeway became a furnace, the sprawling freeway set built for The Matrix Reloaded was a marvel of practical engineering, a looping, 3-mile asphalt corridor meticulously designed to host one of the most elaborate chase sequences ever attempted. The surface was embedded with pyrotechnic charges, debris cannons, and hidden flame tubes meant to simulate explosions as vehicles collided, flipped, and skidded across the pavement. During a take involving multiple stunt cars striking in rapid succession, one vehicle erupted into a fireball that burned far longer than anticipated. The heat radiated downward, warping the asphalt and heating the embedded flame tubes to their breaking point. Without warning, several tubes ruptured, sending uncontrolled jets of fire shooting upward from beneath the roadway. Rubber shards from earlier crashes ignited instantly, creating a serpentine trail of flames that curled along the edges of the set. Stunt drivers maneuvered out of the danger zone while crew members scrambled with extinguishers, hindered by the set's enormous scale. Firefighters on standby rushed to contain the growing blaze, cutting through sections of guardrail to access hotspots. Production halted for the remainder of the day as engineers examined the structural integrity of the freeway, removing scorched portions and reinforcing weakened areas. Warner Brothers later described the event as an unexpected heat anomaly, a phrase that disguised how close the production came to losing one of its most expensive sets. The sequence ultimately became an iconic cinematic achievement, but its realism was shaped by a moment when fire behaved with a will entirely its own. Fact 11. Inglourious Basterds, the cinema fire that nearly escaped the frame. The climactic theater inferno in Inglourious Basterds was designed to be viscerally authentic, with real flames consuming the Nazi-occupied cinema as characters carried out their final act of vengeance. To achieve the effect, the production installed flame bars, accelerant lines, and heat-resistant drapery inside a full-scale reproduction of the theater interior. Quentin Tarantino, insisting on practical intensity, pushed for higher flame output to give the fire a ferocity that digital effects could never match. When the flames were lit, however, the heat grew rapidly beyond expectations. Velvet drapes meant to burn slowly ignited in sudden bursts, sending burning fragments drifting upward toward the balcony. Metal fixtures warped under the heat, and smoke flooded the upper levels, forcing actors and stunt performers to evacuate. As visibility collapsed, emergency crews rushed in, battling fast-moving flames that had crept behind set pieces and into structural supports. Portions of the set were severely damaged, and filming had to be relocated while repairs were assessed. Official statements downplayed the event as a controlled burn that intensified, but eyewitnesses recalled the chaotic rush to escape as the theater filled with smoke. For a few intense minutes, the line between performance and peril vanished completely, leaving behind a haunting reminder that even the most carefully designed fire can suddenly turn real. Fact 12. The Rundown. When a jungle set turned into a spreading wildfire, the lush Hawaiian landscapes featured in The Rundown provided the perfect backdrop for explosive jungle action. But the very elements that made the setting so cinematic also created the conditions for a dangerous blaze. During a nighttime ambush sequence, effects crews positioned a series of explosive charges along a narrow clearing bordered by dense vegetation. The initial detonation produced a dramatic shockwave of heat, but dry brush in the surrounding forest, parched by an unexpected heat wave, caught fire almost instantly. Embers lifted into the air, drifting into treetops and igniting additional pockets of flame on both sides of the clearing. Crew members attempted to stamp out the smaller fires, while others shouted for equipment to be moved away from the advancing blaze. The fire intensified faster than anyone predicted, forcing production to retreat and call local emergency responders. Firefighters battled the growing wildfire for hours, concerned that shifting winds could push flames toward nearby residential areas. Environmental agencies later evaluated the damage, and the studio faced potential fines for exceeding permitted fire use boundaries. Public statements described the event as a brush ignition, but cast and crew remembered a far more frightening reality: an entire forest momentarily teetering on the edge of catastrophe. The footage captured that night became a highlight of the film, yet behind every roaring flame on screen lay the memory of a wildfire the production never intended to unleash. Fact 13. Rambo 3. When the desert became a spreading firestorm, Rambo 3 embraced large-scale explosions designed to evoke the chaos of open desert warfare. But the very environment that made the scenes so striking also turned one setup into a near disaster. The production worked across vast stretches of arid terrain, planting high-yield explosive charges meant to simulate mortar impacts and helicopter assaults. On the day of the incident, filming centered on a valley where dry shrubs clung stubbornly to the sand. When the charges were detonated, the explosions produced towering fireballs that generated an intense wave of heat. That heat ignited nearby vegetation, which burned faster than crew members anticipated. Winds whipped across the valley, pushing flames toward a convoy of production vehicles loaded with fuel, lighting rigs, and ammunition blanks. Stunt teams and crew members rushed to relocate critical equipment, dragging cables and hauling crates as the fire advanced. One generator trailer briefly caught flame before firefighters managed to douse it, sending up a plume of black smoke visible for miles. The blaze spread unevenly, darting across dunes and rocky outcrops, complicating suppression efforts. Helicopters were summoned to survey the area and ensure the fire did not leap to neighboring properties. Official reports later emphasized that the situation had been quickly contained, but those who witnessed it described a far more harrowing scene: a firestorm racing unpredictably across the desert, threatening to unravel the entire production. The film's explosive battle imagery remains iconic, but beneath its spectacle lingers the memory of the day. The desert itself seemed to join the fight. Fact 14. The Rock. Flames beneath the fortress of Alcatraz. The production of The Rock secured access to Alcatraz Island, transforming the historic military site into a labyrinth of action set pieces. But the island's aging infrastructure, dust-laden rafters, brittle wood beams, and chemical residues from decades of storage proved treacherous during a major effects sequence. Inside a decommissioned warehouse, pyrotechnic teams prepared a rolling fireball designed to chase actors across the floor. Accelerant lines were positioned carefully, and flame pots lined the room's perimeter. When the charge detonated, however, the explosion erupted with unexpected vertical force. Flames shot upward, striking the old rafters and igniting layers of dust and deteriorated materials. Burning debris began to fall as the ceiling smoldered, casting sparks across props and equipment. With limited access to water and emergency resources on the island, the situation escalated quickly. Crew members evacuated the building while firefighters attempted to control the blaze before it could spread to adjacent historic structures. Several sections of the warehouse roof collapsed under the heat, and smoke drifted across the island. Visible from the San Francisco shoreline, the studio quietly coordinated with local authorities to manage damage assessments and prevent the incident from becoming a public relations crisis. Official statements described the event as a contained irregularity, but for those present, it was a moment when history and cinematic ambition collided violently. The island that once housed infamous prisoners nearly added a modern catastrophe to its legacy. Fact 15. Quantum of Solace. Fire on the Italian racetrack. The high-speed chase sequences in Quantum of Solace demanded precision engineering and extensive stunt coordination, culminating in the construction of a temporary racetrack at an Italian location repurposed for controlled vehicle destruction. Effects crews installed charges beneath collapsible barriers and along the track's edge, expecting a clean, linear chain of explosions. But during a test detonation, a misaligned charge sent a burst of sparks arcing across the track. The sparks landed on synthetic sound-dampening materials used to reinforce temporary structures, materials that burned intensely once ignited. Flames raced along the panels, accelerated by adhesives and foam insulation. Within seconds, the fire spread in both directions, trapping equipment and lighting rigs between advancing walls of smoke. Crew members were forced to flee as black plumes rolled upward, casting a haze across the racetrack. Firefighters fought the blaze for hours, dousing hot spots where the materials continued to melt and reignite. Portions of the set were reduced to warped metal and charred remnants, and production halted while environmental inspectors evaluated the extent of the damage. Official accounts framed the blaze as a minor setback, yet internal reports revealed the near loss of expensive camera systems and stunt vehicles. The final film showcases fast, polished action, but the memory of the racetrack engulfed in flames and the scramble to preserve what equipment they could remain, etched into the minds of those who witnessed the chaos firsthand. Bonus fact: the lost action film that burned before it was ever seen. In the late 70s, a small independent studio attempted to break into the action genre with a film that promised explosive spectacle on a modest budget. They secured a vacant warehouse to serve as both production office and primary shooting location, converting the space into a maze of makeshift rooms for a climactic showdown involving low-cost pyrotechnics. The effects team, ambitious but inexperienced, stored canisters of fuel substitutes, prop explosives, and racks of flammable set pieces throughout the building. Their goal was to create a sequence that would rival the intensity of major Hollywood productions. But during a late-night test, a spark from a faulty detonator leapt into a corner where months' worth of chemical residue, sawdust, and aging props had accumulated. The ignition was immediate and devastating. Flames surged upward, racing along rafters coated with decades-old dust. Crew members sleeping in adjacent rooms awoke to crackling heat and choking smoke, fleeing the warehouse with seconds to spare. Firefighters battled the inferno until sunrise, but by then the building had collapsed inward, burying equipment, film negatives, costumes, and nearly every trace of the production under charred debris. Insurance investigators deemed the cause preventable, and the studio, already financially strained, collapsed under the weight of its losses. The movie was never finished, its title never publicly announced. All that remained were rumors whispered by those who survived, that the fire had consumed not just a set, but an entire cinematic dream before the world ever had the chance to witness it. Fire can be hidden, edited, reshaped into spectacle, but its truth always leaves a mark. These stories remind us that behind the controlled chaos of Hollywood lies a world where danger is real, and the line between performance and disaster can vanish in a heartbeat. If you want to keep uncovering the secrets that studios tried to bury, the forgotten moments that nearly rewrote film history, stay with us. Behind the velvet curtain, there are still shadows waiting to be revealed, and the next story burns just as hot.